Welcome to ACC Position U, the show where we examine which ACC school has the best tradition at each position. Today, it's the linebacker. We have a terrific panel of experts that will help us decide which school will be named Linebacker U. But before we meet them, let's look at the criteria that was used in determining our finalists. First, we looked at how successful the players were in college. Second, how high was their NFL draft position? And finally, we looked at their NFL careers. Also, since the makeup of the ACC changed over the years, we considered all players from a school's history, whether they played in the ACC at that time or not. And while the players from the past 20 to 25 years are fresher in our minds, we didn't limit our selections to just the recent past. There can certainly be arguments made for several other schools, but based on that criteria right there, we narrowed it down to 4 schools as our finalists at linebacker: Boston College, Florida State, Miami, and North Carolina. Now let's meet our esteemed panel to debate the merits of each of our finalists. Roddy Jones was a 4-year starting running back at Georgia Tech and is now an analyst on ESPN and the ACC Network. Andrea Adelson is a college football writer who covers ACC sports at ESPN.com. And Wes Bryant was an offensive lineman for Wake Forest and is now a host on the ACC Digital Network. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate it very much. Let's start with Boston College right off the top and begin with you, Roddy. Make a case for a BC linebacker being Linebacker U.
Well, this one's a pretty easy one. I'm going to grab my notes because I don't want to get any of this wrong. And I'm starting with Luke Kuechly. Now, just listen to this. 158 tackles his freshman year, 183 tackles his sophomore year, 191 tackles his junior year. First-team All-American 3 years in a row. He won the Butkus, the Lombardi, the Lot Impact, and the Nagurski Trophy. Was the first winner in the ACC of the Nagurski Trophy, something that only Bradley Chubb and Aaron Donald have won since. And I'm just getting started. Let's go to the NFL, where he's a 5-time first-team All-Pro. He's the 2013 Defensive Player of the Year, 7-time Pro Bowler, 2010s All-Decade Team, certainly a first-team Hall of Famer. And he retired early. Like, that was in a short period of time in the NFL. Luke Kuechly is a tackling machine, a smarter linebacker, as instinctive a linebacker, as athletic a linebacker as we have ever seen at any level. So Luke Kuechly has really set the tone, not only for linebackers at Boston College, but maybe for linebackers in all of the ACC.
Woo-wee! Sit back and take a rest, Roddy. My goodness, that was a long list. Andrea, who comes to your mind when you think BC?
Well, there's one thing Luke Kuechly doesn't have, and it's the black warrior eye paint and the mohawk. Let's talk about Mark Herzlich, whose story is absolutely incredible. Obviously, Luke did fantastic things at Boston College, but so did Mark, overcoming cancer to be able to get back onto the field. Another tackling machine, the true definition of grit and toughness, considering the way he played the game and the way that he fought cancer and won. He was undrafted, yet he still played a long career with the New York Giants. And now that I come to think of it, since we work with Mark here at ESPN and the ACC Network, maybe I should ask him to give me some tips on how to do that face paint, because I feel like I need to have that warrior mentality.
You can have that warrior mentality, but I will not allow him to give you makeup tips, Andrea. Okay? I am putting my foot down on this show. Wes, how about you?
Well, I'm going to close it out talking about a guy off the edge that was an absolute tornado, Harold Landry. Tall, rangy, fast first step, led the nation in sacks and forced fumbles in 2016. He had 16 and a half of those sacks, 3-time All-ACC selection, and was a second-round pick. This guy was just a tremendous player for Boston College, really made it. He was the guy you had to game plan for when you played the Eagles. This guy had all the athleticism that you could ask for and just tore up opponents' backfields week in and week out. And, oh, yeah, he would also get the ball back for the offense. As I said, led the nation in forced fumbles as well. So I'm going to go with Harold Landry.
I like the reference you used to a tornado because I think of some of the best linebackers to ever play the game as a Tasmanian devil-like character out on the field. Roddy, you of course were running away from these guys. What do you think the greatest linebackers have in terms of their mentality? How would you describe the mentality that makes a great linebacker?
Well, I played against Mark Herzlich, and luckily, I was in the league when Kuechly was there, and luckily I missed him. But the thing, first off, you have to be really smart and in tune with what the offense is trying to do to you. And both Herzlich, Kuechly, and also Harold Landry had that. But the second thing is you have to have this mentality that this is my field and you will not pass. Like Gandalf, you shall not pass. and Herzlich and Kuechly in particular definitely had that. Athleticism helps, instinct helps. But getting in your playbook, knowing what you're doing, and then just an overall mentality. I'm going to take on anybody on the offense that's coming at me at any time.
I knew we would get a Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter reference in somewhere. I just didn't know that it would be at the top of the show in the first segment. So well done, Roddy. There. That wraps up our look at Boston College. The next contender is Florida State. We'll be back to look at the Seminoles when ACC Position U continues. Welcome back to ACC Position U and our look at the linebacker position. The next finalist we'll discuss is Florida State. Andrea, I'll start with you. Who comes to mind in the middle that really got the job done for the Seminoles?
I'm glad I got first pick here because there's really only one, and it's Derek Brooks. And by the way, shout out to the old neck rolls that the linebackers used to wear, because watching some of the old Florida State clips, I was reminded that that was one of the things that really stood out when Derek Brooks played. But the biggest thing that stood out, obviously, was his athleticism and his tackling with such force. He always was around the ball, whether we're talking about run support, even dropping back into coverage, always making plays happen. And to be able to take such an outstanding career at Florida State, where I think he's in the conversation for greatest Florida State player of all time, and then to do it on the NFL level and have a Hall of Fame career, that is the complete package of what you want to get done. Doesn't matter what position you're playing in. To come in as an outstanding high school recruit, dominate at the college level, then dominate in the NFL level. Derek Brooks checks all three of those boxes.
At that position, you're processing so much information, and Brooks made it look simple. He simplified the process. It was almost like see ball, get ball, and he was able to do just that. Wes, who comes to your mind when you think of Florida State linebackers?
Well, I am going to talk about Marvin Jones. Shade Tree is what they called him back in the day. This guy was a monster player in the middle of the Seminoles defense. To tell you just how dominant he was, finished fourth in the Heisman voting in 1992 as a Mike backer. So you know how dominant you have to be, because we know the Heisman is an offensive award for the most part. Also won the Lombardi and the Buckets, and went on to a nice solid career in the NFL, over 1,000 tackles. So Shade Tree was also dominant, and he put the fear into his opponent's big hits back when you could, do the hits that are illegal now that get you suspended for a half. This guy was putting it on folks. When you heard the pads cracking in Tallahassee back in the day, 55, Marvin Jones was more than likely the guy who was getting up from the pile. Big time player.
Yeah, Shade Tree hurt some people when it was allowed back in the day. Roddy, I will task you with following that up.
I don't know if I can. I mean, a nickname like Shade Tree, I can't. I got nothing for that. But I'm going to go with the guy who actually didn't play linebacker at Florida State, moved to linebacker in the NFL, and that's Peter Boulware, defensive end at Florida State, 19 sacks, still an ACC record for a single season. His junior year, 4th overall pick, and then goes to the NFL, where he is a fantastic player, defensive rookie of the year, a 4-time Pro Bowler. He was a guy that played a long time in the league and really defined a generation of linebackers. When you talked about linebackers in the NFL, Peter Boulware was one of those first names off your tongue with what he was able to do. But his Florida State career started on the defensive line, but his NFL career got him into this category as a linebacker. Was excellent in both of those. Was really one of those players that defined a generation of Florida State and in the NFL at linebacker. So I went with Peter Boulware.
And when you play multiple positions like that and then move to such a leadership position on the field, and you understand what people are supposed to be doing in front of you and behind you, it just makes you so much better at doing that task and that job at the linebacking position. So great point by you, Roddy. I cannot get Shade Tree out of my head. So my question to you, Roddy, Wes, and even you, Andrea, what was your nickname or nicknames, if you had one, when you played?
Oh.
No?
Yeah, I always had something
This
with
is a
like
safe
Rod.
space.
I always had something with Rod in it, so like it was Hot Rod or Lightning Rod. Like it was. I never had any good ones. I hope you guys did. And we never got a good nickname.
Wes, did you have a good one?
Nothing too major. Everybody just called me Big Wes, and I still kind of get that to this day. So they just put the Big Wes on. A little smaller than I was back then when they called me that, but that was the nickname.
Andrea, anybody in the writer's room have a nickname for you?
I mean, how is it that the writer here has a better nickname than that? Red Zone. Hello, Red Zone.
Let's go.
I mean,
I like that. That's good.
is that not the best one?
That is great. And hold on, we got to turn this back on Katie because Katie was a player of the year in the ACC in volleyball. Katie, you had to have a nickname too, right?
See, Roddy, the beautiful thing about being a host is I don't have to share because I'm the one running this thing. So we're going to close the book on the Knowles. If you really wanted to know, my brothers called me Fat Waller. We need a whole nother show if we're going to get into why they nicknamed me Fat Waller. That's it for the Seminoles. When we come back, we're going to look at the Miami Hurricanes and the North Carolina Tar Heels. How about Ray Lewis and Lawrence Taylor, maybe? We'll have more when we continue on ACC Position U. Welcome back to ACC Position U. We have two more schools to consider in our look at linebacker, Miami and North Carolina. Wes, we'll start with you. Who do you think set the standard for Miami's linebacker corps through history?
Well, I'm going to talk about a guy that I swapped a little paint with and also had a verbal altercation with during our game. He may not remember that, but I'm talking about John Beeson. He was a big-time linebacker for Miami. Wasn't the biggest guy on the field, but he definitely hit like he weighed 340 pounds. Big-time player, first-round draft pick by the Carolina Panthers. Had an all-pro season as well. Injuries really hurt him, but just was a complete thumper. Had over 130 tackles at Miami. Just a very, very productive player. I think he's underrated as far as when people talk about great Miami defenders, but a ball player nonetheless.
He outplayed his size, which I think is important for guys in the middle like that. Roddy, how about you?
Well, first off, Beast was incredible, and we talked about Luke Kuechly. Kuechly has said that John Beeson was one of the reasons he was able to have the early success that he had, so that's a great pick, Wes. But come on, man, when we're talking Miami linebacker, there's only one way you can go here. How many kids did the dance coming out? Fly, boom, boom, let's go. It's Ray Lewis. Come on. You're talking about a guy that was a two-time All-American. You're talking about a guy that led the Big East in tackles twice. That's not why we remember Ray Lewis. Two-time Super Bowl champion, numerous All-Pros, was two-time Defensive Player of the Year. When you talk about the greatest linebacker in the history of NFL football, Ray Lewis is one of the first two or three names to come out of your mouth. So Ray Lewis is the guy. When you talk about linebackers, in the ACC or schools that have played in the ACC, certainly at Miami, you got to go with Ray Lewis.
Yeah, I think he's top of most people's list. I don't know if he's top of Andrea Adelson's list. What say you, Andrea?
Well, there might not have been a Ray Lewis to Miami if it wasn't for old school linebacker Jesse Armstead. I'm taking it way, way back. And as a kid growing up in South Florida, hopefully folks who watched the Canes in the 80s and the early 90s understand what I'm talking about. Jesse really set the standard for Miami. He's one of the first to help make Miami in contention for Linebacker U. He played with Michael Barrow and Darren Smith, two other Miami linebacker greats in '92, forming the Bermuda Triangle at linebacker for Miami. And that's what I remember most about those teams, just the way that those three guys, and specifically Jesse, really punished people. And one more thing about Jesse, he was an 8th round draft pick, and he had a knee injury in college, and not a lot of people really projected him out to play in the NFL, but he had a long career. He was a Pro Bowler. So I'm going back to where it all started. Jesse Armstead, Miami.
Thank you for the history lesson, Andrea. We always appreciate that. All right, let's turn our focus now to North Carolina. And Roddy, I'll start with you. Who comes to mind right off the top when you think of Carolina linebackers?
Well, I can sum this up with 2 letters. LT. That's it. Early 80s North Carolina linebacker was ACC Player of the Year, redefined the position of linebacker and what it meant to be in the NFL. A true guy. I mean, they've made movies about the fact that Lawrence Taylor is the reason left tackles get made so much. That's the reason, or one of the big things that was covered in The Blind Side. His success with the New York Giants, obviously NFL Hall of Famer. He's another one of those guys that when you talk about the greatest pass rushers, greatest linebackers of all time, Lawrence Taylor is one of the first names out of your mouth. So I feel like you guys gave me the easy ones. We just went through Ray Lewis, then I've got Lawrence Taylor, a guy that really needs no selling. But you talk about him at UNC, and you got to go with one of the greatest of all time.
I appreciate the walk down memory lane that we just had from both of you. Andrea, please give me somebody who has played in my lifetime.
Well, I was going to lodge a formal complaint that Roddy got the slam dunk choices, okay?
Yeah.
But I am going to give us a recent player, as recent as it gets, Chaz Surratt, North Carolina. And really, the most impressive thing about him is he's a former quarterback, but you would never know it watching him play linebacker. He was all over the place for North Carolina the 2 years he started there, all ACC selection both years. So think about what it took for him to change his mindset from the quarterback position, where you don't want to get hit, to linebacker, where you're now delivering the hits and you're wreaking havoc everywhere you go across the defense. Turned himself into an NFL draft pick at linebacker. To me, that just speaks volumes about who he is, his dedication, also belief in the North Carolina coaching staff, that a guy who played quarterback could go ahead and be an all-ACC linebacker and end up being an NFL pick.
I remember discussing with him that transition that first year, and he says, I was so sore after taking all of those hits in practice. He said, I didn't remember what it felt like. And he said, so that was a transitional period for him just to be able to get into that aggressive mindset. So great point by you. Wes, we'll let you round it out for the Carolina Tar Heels.
Well, Roddy gave us 2 letters, and I've got 2 more for you. I've got BS. But not what you're thinking. I was talking about Brian Simmons, first round pick of the 1998 NFL draft. He was a 2-time All-American and had 36 tackles for loss while in Chapel Hill. And he was one of those guys when Mac really had it rolling and had studs all over that roster. He was one of them. Just doesn't get the credit. You don't hear his name brought up when you're talking about the greatest ACC linebackers or really some of the great defenders in ACC history. But this guy was an absolute stud, and he played on some great defenses there, and he was one of the real great players on those defenses. So Brian Simmons, definitely kudos to him.
All right, you've made your cases for Miami's linebacker core to create that legacy, as well as North Carolina. Which will our panel choose when we come back for Linebacker U in the ACC? That's next on ACC Position U. Welcome back to ACC Position U. A quick review of the criteria we're working with: college career, NFL draft slot, and NFL career. And now the moment of truth. Who does our panel think has the best linebacking legacy in ACC football? Roddy, take it away, please.
Look, I don't know which way Andrea and Wes went on this one, but I thought this one was pretty easy. It's Miami. I mean, you're talking about the greatest linebacker in NFL history in Ray Lewis. In the lineage, John Beeson, Dan Morgan, Jonathan Vilma, all the way to the present, where you've got guys like Michael Pinckney and Shaq Quarterman, who may not have been the same type draft picks, but certainly had impacts on the college level. I played against guys like Sean Spence, who was an incredible Miami linebacker. So I thought this one was sort of a slam dunk. I went with the U. I don't know how those 2 guys went, but if they didn't go with the U, then we might have to check those credentials, guys.
Ooh, fighting words, Andrea. Do you agree with Roddy, or are you going to dissent here?
It's all about the U. I mean, this was the easiest choice possible. And the reason I say that is because every single decade going back to the 1980s, we can sit here and talk about multiple Miami linebackers who not only made an impact in college, but made an impact in the NFL. Beyond just Ray Lewis, I covered the 2001 team, and you're talking about guys like Jonathan Wilma and DJ Williams, who we haven't even talked about yet at Miami, who made a big impact there. I'll never forget when he walked in for his very first interview as a true freshman. I looked up at him and I thought to myself, how is this an 18-year-old young man who just got finished playing high school? He looked like he was already an NFL-made linebacker. That's how big he was, and certainly what he did at Miami and then in his NFL career, it speaks volumes. And Denzel Perryman's another more recent linebacker that we haven't even talked about. So I think we've probably forgotten a few guys, but that's because there are so many Miami linebackers to talk about when we're talking about Position U and being the best.
Okay, Wes, I'll turn it to you. Tread very carefully here because they've made some great points. I don't know if you want to go rogue.
Well, I'm going to go clean sweep across the board. The Miami Hurricanes, they've already said a lot of great names. And then Dan Morgan was another one of my favorite players. Came down here and had a great career with the Carolina Panthers. And an even bigger blast from the past. I don't think we'll ever see another 5'8", 5'9", 180-pound Mike linebacker like Rohan Marley, son of Bob Marley, that played for the Kings way back in the day and was just tenacious. So, yeah, Miami is not even close to you. I'm not going to upset the apple cart here.
A clean sweep. If you could sum up Miami's linebacking core and its legacy in one word, Roddy, what would it be? You're all going to have to answer this, so get it ready.
I would say legendary. I mean, you're talking about college and NFL players that have defined the game in more ways than one for decades. So legendary is what I would go with.
Andrea?
Dominant is what I would go with because of the way they've dominated both on the college level and the NFL level. That is the model for what you want your linebacker group to look like decade after decade.
Wes, last but not least.
I'm going to go with Regal. This is a royal group right here. These guys just have so many great players that were arguably the premier players at their position when they were in school, and a lot of them turned out to be really good NFL players. So, royalty.
You three are legendary, dominant, and regal as well. For all of your insight, thank you so much for the time. We appreciate it. That's all for Linebacker U. Congratulations to the Miami Hurricanes. Tune in next time when we'll tackle another position on ACC Position U.